You do not deserve a seat at this table." The words did not slip. They landed like a hammer in the middle of the boardroom, sharp enough to slice through the air and sting every ear in the room. A man in a tailored gray suit leaned over with a smirk, holding a steaming cup of coffee high above a young black woman seated quietly at the far end. Then, without hesitation, he poured it straight over her head. Dark liquid cascaded down her face, soaking her blouse, dripping onto the worn leather briefcase at her feet. A ripple of laughter broke out across the table. Phones shifted. Some hands covered mouths, some pressed record. And in that silence between cruelty and consequence, something else was already stirring. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to her. She did not scream. She did not even flinch. Her hands remained folded neatly on the table as the coffee traced bitter lines down her skin. Across from her, one woman whispered, "Unbelievable," under her breath, while another stifled a nervous laugh as if cruelty had become routine. The man with the empty cup leaned back, satisfied, his voice dripping with mockery. "Consider that a gift. People like you should be grateful for scraps." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and merciless. Every eye turned toward her, waiting for an outburst, a scene, something they could point to as proof that she did not belong. But she sat motionless, her silence heavier than any shout. It was not weakness, it was something else. At the far corner, a young intern shifted in his seat, phone trembling in his hand as the red light blinked. He wanted the world to see, yet she raised a single finger, stopping him before he pressed upload. Her gaze, calm but searing, said what her lips did not. Not yet. And in that moment, as coffee dripped onto the boardroom carpet, the room did not feel like a meeting anymore. It felt like a trial. Only no one in that room realized the roles were about to reverse. He leaned closer, the empty cup still dripping, his smile wide like cruelty itself. "Look at her. Coffee suits are better than a blazer," he muttered loud enough for the boardroom to hear. A few chuckles broke the uneasy silence. One man at the far side whispered, "She should not even be here." Another nudged his colleague as if the humiliation was entertainment. The room smelled of roasted beans and arrogance. She reached for a napkin but stopped halfway, letting the coffee run unchecked down her face. Her stillness unsettled more than a scream ever could. The intern with the phone hesitated, thumb hovering above the record button. He looked to her again. She lifted her gaze, eyes calm but unyielding. No words, only a steady signal. Not yet. The manager tapped the table with his knuckles, sharp and impatient. "Security will handle this. Get her out before she ruins the carpet." His tone was rehearsed, dripping with authority. Two assistants shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Silence became their shield. Silence became their complicity. At the opposite end, a young analyst pressed her lips tight. Her pen shook against the page. Finally, she whispered, "This is wrong." Her voice was small, but the words spread like a crack through glass. Heads turned. The manager shot her a look that could freeze fire. "Stay in your lane," he snapped. The woman in the coffee-soaked blouse did not move. She closed her eyes briefly, and a memory surfaced. 17 years old, waiting in the lobby of a scholarship office in Atlanta. She wore her Sunday best. A receptionist looked her over and said, "This area is for real applicants." She had carried that sting for decades, and now, here it was again, only louder, only crueler. Her phone buzzed once inside her briefcase. She ignored it. She wanted them to finish digging their own pit. The intern finally lowered his device, ashamed. He whispered to himself, "Why does this feel like a trial?" The answer was already clear. The boardroom had turned into a courtroom, but none of them realized who truly held the gavel. The manager straightened his tie and gestured toward her soaked papers on the table. "Fraud! That is all this is! Throw her out!" The assistants shifted again, caught between obedience and conscience, and the coffee kept dripping, steady as a clock, counting down to something they could not yet see. The order came sharp as steel. "Remove her," the manager barked, his voice cracking with the thrill of dominance. Two security staff appeared at the door, summoned by nothing more than his arrogance. Their heavy shoes struck the floor in rhythm, each step echoing through the boardroom like a countdown. The hum of whispered conversation grew louder. a tide of judgment pressing against one woman at the far end of the table. One guard reached for the worn leather briefcase at her side. He yanked it free, tossing it onto the polished floor as if it were trash. Papers spilled, pages skittering across the room in the blast of the air conditioner. Laughter broke out again, sharper this time. "Fake contracts," one voice sneered. Another added, "Probably forged credentials. That is all she has." She bent forward not to scramble for the papers, but to place one hand lightly on the table. Her palm rested flat, steady, grounding the storm. She lifted her head slowly, eyes sweeping the room. Not anger, not fear, only patience, honed razor-sharp by years of moments like this. The kind of patience that unnerved oppressors more than rage ever could. From the back corner, the intern's phone glowed again, the red circle trembling. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I should post this. People need to see." The young analyst beside him shook her head. "Wait, watch her. She is not finished." "Ugh." The manager smirked at their silence, mistaking it for defeat. He leaned in, his tie brushing against the coffee-stained table. "This is a boardroom for leaders, not for strays who wander in from the street." He wanted her broken, small, erased in front of witnesses. But the words only bounced off the wall of her stillness. She finally spoke, her voice calm and deliberate. "Every word you are saying, every order you are giving, is writing your own judgment." The room quieted for a heartbeat. Some faces flushed red, others drained white. But the guards did not stop. One reached for her arm, the other bent to gather the scattered pages. Then her phone buzzed again, louder this time against the hollow wood of the table. She slid it free, pressed one button, and lifted it to her ear. A clear voice answered on the other end. "Protocol is ready. Do you want us to proceed?" Her reply was soft, almost a whisper, but every syllable cut the air. "Not yet. Let them finish." The boardroom stilled. For the first time, the laughter faltered. Somewhere between arrogance and unease, they realized they had misread her entirely. What they thought was weakness was something else entirely. It was control. The silence stretched until it snapped. One of the guards grabbed her arm with a firm grip, forcing her halfway out of her chair. Gasps rippled through the boardroom. The analyst at the far end stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "Stop," she shouted, her voice trembling but clear. "You cannot treat her like this." The manager's eyes narrowed, sharp as a blade. "Sit down," he ordered. "You have no idea who she is. Nobody. An intruder. A fraud." His words cracked through the room, loud enough to drown conscience. Some people looked away, others smirked nervously, grateful it was not them in the spotlight. The guard pulled harder, but the woman in the coffee-stained blouse did not resist. Her body stayed rooted, her gaze anchored straight ahead. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying further than any shout. "You are not protecting this company. You are destroying it with every insult that leaves your mouth." A paper from her briefcase had landed near the analyst's feet. The young woman bent to pick it up. Her eyes scanned the heading, and color drained from her face. It was not a fake contract. It was an acquisition document signed by the corporate board itself. She looked up, mouth slightly open, but fear locked her words inside. The intern saw it too, his phone lowering as his eyes grew wide. He whispered, "That is real." His whisper spread like smoke. Two more people leaned in, catching fragments, the truth weaving through the crowd. The manager slammed a fist onto the table. "Enough of this circus. Call the police. Now." His command was sharp, desperate, like someone sensing the ground shifting beneath his feet. One of the assistants lifted the landline receiver with a shaky hand, dialing digits that felt heavier with every press. She finally turned her head, just slightly, and spoke again. "If you call them, be ready to explain why you assaulted a woman who owns more of this company than you ever will." The guard holding her arm froze. The other paused mid-step with the scattered papers in his hands. A pulse of uncertainty spread through the room. The analyst exhaled shakily, courage finding her spine. "She is telling the truth," she said louder this time. "I saw the document. Her name is on it." The manager whipped his head toward her, fury twisting his face. "You will regret that." But his words felt hollow now, brittle against the quiet strength building in the center of the room. Coffee dripped once more onto the carpet, steady as a clock. The countdown had begun. Only none of them realized it was counting down to their own undoing. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The analyst's voice, small yet undeniable, had shifted the balance. The guard loosened his grip, uncertainty etched across his face. The manager, red with fury, slammed the table again. "She forged it," he barked. "Do you really think someone like her belongs at this table? Look at her clothes. Look at her posture. She is playing dress-up and you fools are falling for it." Laughter rose from two executives near the window, forced and sharp. Yet it sounded thinner than before, brittle against the rising current of doubt. The intern stepped forward, his phone still trembling in his hand. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking but steadying with each word, "I saw her name. The file is real." He swallowed hard. "And I am recording all of this." The room shifted. Faces turned toward him, some in shock, others in quiet relief that someone had finally spoken. The manager's smile faltered, the arrogance in his eyes replaced with something closer to fear. He jabbed a finger at the intern. "Turn that off. Now." The young man did not move. His hands shook, but his feet held their ground. "No," he said, voice breaking, then sharpening. "The world needs to see this." For a moment the room buzzed with hushed voices, fragments of doubt rising like sparks. "Could it be true?" whispered one. "Her name was on the header," said another. The tide was turning, slowly, steadily, pulled by the weight of truth. She sat straighter, the coffee stains drying like battle scars on her blouse. Her silence now carried the weight of a gavel. Then, with a voice calm and unwavering, she addressed the room. "Every insult you spoke, every order you gave, every word dripping with contempt has already been logged. You believe silence means defeat. You are wrong. Silence means évidence." A heavy pause followed. The guard stepped back, releasing her arm entirely. The analyst nodded, voice firmer now. "She is right. I saw it myself. She belongs here more than any of us." The manager's fist tightened, his face pale. "You are all being manipulated," he shouted. But the conviction was gone. The authority that once wrapped his words had dissolved into desperation. Phones across the room began to rise, not just the interns. 3, then 5, then more, small red lights blinking like beacons. Witnesses were multiplying, the boardroom no longer his stage. She placed her phone gently on the table, her finger hovering above the screen. Her calm cut through the chaos. "You wanted an audience," she said. "Now you have one." The room fell silent again, but it was no longer his silence. It was hers, and for the first time, they all felt it. Control had shifted. The silence weighed heavier than stone. Every eye in the boardroom turned to her, yet she did not move. Her stillness was louder than their laughter had ever been. Then the manager snapped, his voice jagged. "Enough of this farce. Security, drag her out. She is nothing but a fraud, a stain in this room." The guards hesitated, their eyes darting from her to the phones now raised across the table. One by one, small red lights blinked, witnesses growing braver. The intern's hand steadied, the analyst stood taller. Even a senior executive at the far end adjusted his glasses, his lips pressing thin in disapproval of the manager's cruelty. The manager saw it. His control was slipping. His tone grew harsher, louder, desperate. "She is not a client. She is not a partner. She is a con artist. If you cannot see that, you are blind." His words cracked, more venom than authority. She finally lifted her gaze and locked eyes with him. Her voice was calm, deliberate, like water smoothing stone. "You call me a fraud because you cannot imagine a black woman owning the seat you covet. But your disbelief is not my burden. It is your downfall." Gasps rippled around the table. A woman near the door lowered her pen, her hands trembling. A man whispered, "She said owning." The phrase traveled like lightning through the room, a spark that lit every hidden suspicion. The manager leaned across the table, face twisted with rage. "Prove it then. Show us your title. Show us your authority. Right here, right now." She did not flinch. Instead, she reached for her briefcase on the floor, the one tossed aside and dismissed. She lifted it slowly, set it back on the table, and opened it with steady hands. The papers inside were not smeared with coffee. They were pristine, each sealed and marked. The analyst recognized the header again and spoke with sudden clarity. "That is the corporate seal. That is authentic." The room shifted once more. Murmurs rose, louder, uncontainable. "It cannot be forged. Why would she have those documents? What if it is true?" The manager pounded the table, veins visible on his hand. "Do not believe this performance. She is lying. She is playing you all. But his voice cracked, less command and more pleading. She closed the briefcase again, the click of the lock echoing like a gavel. Her words cut clean through the noise. I do not need to perform for you. My power is not proven by papers. It is proven by what happens next. And in that moment, the balance tipped fully. Every person in the room felt it. The question was no longer if she belonged. The question was how much longer he would. The moment cracked open when the manager's fury boiled over. He grabbed one of the acquisition papers from the table, crumpled it in his fist, and flung it across the room. "This is worthless," he shouted. His face was red, his voice sharp, his authority unraveling in real time. Then he stepped further, his rage unchecked. He reached down and shoved her briefcase onto the floor once again. The sound of leather hitting the carpet echoed like a gavel in reverse. Not judgment, but desperation. "You do not belong here," he screamed, spit flying with every syllable. The boardroom froze. Phones stopped midair. Even the guards looked uneasy, as though they had just witnessed a line crossed. One muttered under his breath, "That is too far." She did not move. She sat like an anchor in the storm, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Her voice, low and steady, sliced through the tension. "Every gesture you make is proof. You are not protecting this company. You are exposing it." The intern finally lifted his phone higher, no longer trembling. His whisper became a declaration. "I am recording this. Everyone will see." The analyst at his side added, "They should. This is not just arrogance. This is abuse." "Oh." The manager turned on them, finger pointed like a weapon. "Turn those off or you will both be fired before you leave this room." But no one lowered their phones. In fact, more screens rose. Red recording lights multiplied across the table like fireflies in the dark. A senior board member, silent until now, cleared his throat. "I think we should listen to her." His words, calm but firm, cracked the last veneer of the manager's control. The manager barked back, "You are all being fooled by theatrics." His tie was crooked now, his posture unraveling. He looked less like a leader and more like a man drowning in his own rage. Then he made the mistake that sealed his fate. He reached down, grabbed her arm, and tried to yank her from her chair. Gasps filled the room. One guard stepped forward instinctively. The analyst shouted, "Let go of her!" She turned her head slowly, eyes fixed on his hand gripping her sleeve. Her voice came cold, sharp, and absolute. "Touch me again, and you will answer in a courtroom." The room fell dead silent. The weight of her words pressed on every chest. The guard stepped between them at last, pulling the manager back with visible reluctance but clear necessity. The manager shook with rage, but his voice cracked as he tried one last time. "She is lying. She is nobody." She rose slowly, the stains of coffee across her blouse now looking less like humiliation and more like armor. Her words rang steady, undeniable. "I am exactly who you fear I am." The truth was no longer hidden. It was standing tall in the center of the room. The air inside the boardroom felt charged, as if every breath carried static. She stood tall now, coffee stains dark across her blouse, the briefcase closed at her side. Her presence alone commanded the space, but the manager could not stop himself. His voice cracked with desperation. "You are a liar. You forged those papers. You tricked them all. Security, take her out before she poisons this room any further." The guards hesitated. Their eyes met briefly, torn between obedience and the quiet certainty that something larger was unfolding. The analyst spoke again, louder this time. "She is not lying. I saw her name. It was signed by the board. I recognize the seal." The intern lifted his phone higher, turning it slightly so the red recording light was visible to the whole room. "The world is watching now," he said, voice steadier than before. She finally lifted her phone from the table, pressed one button, and held it to her ear. A calm voice answered instantly. "Protocol confirmed. We are prepared to initiate." She spoke clearly, her tone low but resonant. "Begin internal verification. Audit every biased phrase spoken in this room." The manager laughed, a harsh and broken sound. "What are you talking about? Some stunt to scare us? You do not have that kind of power." The reply came through her phone, amplified in the still room. "Audit initiated. Records are live. Confirmed connection to corporate ethics board." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Executives shifted in their chairs, suddenly aware that every insult, every slur, every unjustified order was no longer trapped in this room. It was logged, verified, and sent. The manager's face drained of color, but he pressed forward anyway. "It does not matter. You have no authority. You do not belong here." Her eyes locked on him. "I am here because this is mine. You tried to erase me with your words. Now I will answer you with truth." Huh. She lowered her phone slowly, then nodded once to the voice on the other end. "Proceed to Phase 2. The response was immediate. Phase 2 initiated. Background checks on all active participants in this incident have been logged. Compliance reports are streaming now." The room erupted in whispers. A senior board member shifted forward, uneasy. "Is this real?" he muttered to no one in particular. Another replied, "It feels too precise to be fake." "Oh." The manager pounded the table again, but the sound no longer carried authority. It was hollow. His shouts now sounded like the final echoes of a man watching his power collapse. And through it all, she stood unmoved, the storm gathering at her command. She had waited in silence. Now the reckoning had begun. The boardroom had turned into a theater of reckoning. Screens around the walls flickered as if on cue, the company's internal system projecting compliance alerts in real time. Names, timestamps, and phrases scrolled across the display like evidence carved in stone. Unauthorized guest. Fraudulent. You do not belong here. Each one appeared, line after line, stripped of denial and frozen in digital truth. Executives shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter now replaced with unease. One whispered, "Those are our words." Another muttered, "This cannot be happening live." She remained standing at the center, eyes sweeping the room. Her voice cut through the whispers, calm but undeniable. "This is not a trick. This is accountability. Every insult has been captured. Every act of arrogance is now a record." The manager stumbled forward, his face drained of color, yet still desperate to cling to authority. "No one will believe this," he hissed. "You are manipulating the system. You hacked it." She tilted her head slightly, her expression still steady. "I do not need to hack what I own." A hush rippled through the room. For the first time, the words landed with weight. Executives stared, some with widened eyes, others with dawning realization. The intern's phone shook as he whispered to the analyst, "Did she say own?" The analyst nodded slowly, her voice low but certain. "She did, and I believe her." The manager tried again, shouting to drown the silence. "Do not listen to her. She is fabricating all of this." But even as he spoke, another alert flashed on the screen. "Incident report logged. Verbal misconduct by manager. Pending review." The guard nearest him took a step back, as if distancing himself from a man already condemned. She finally moved closer to the table, her hand resting on the closed briefcase. "You demanded proof. You demanded history. Here it is. Not because I owe you my identity, but because this room deserves to see who has been leading it into disgrace." With a deliberate motion, she pulled a single document from the case and laid it flat on the table. The gold seal gleamed under the harsh, fluorescent lights. The signature was unmistakable. Gasps filled the air. A senior board member leaned forward, glasses trembling in his hand. That is the founding document. Her name is there. She is listed as the chief executive officer." The room fell silent, every eye locked on her. She lifted her chin, her words sharp and final. "You called me an intruder in a boardroom I built. You called me a fraud in a company I own. And now you will face the truth you tried to bury." The silence that followed was no longer disbelief. It was fear. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The founding document lay flat on the table, the gold seal shining under fluorescent light, impossible to deny. The manager froze in place, his mouth half open, as if words had abandoned him. Executives who once laughed now looked as though the floor had tilted beneath them. The guards, caught between orders and truth, slowly lowered their hands, stepping back. Phones across the room captured every flicker of panic. The intern's voice broke the silence. "Everyone is seeing this live," he said, his red recording light steady. "The world will know." The analyst nodded firmly. They should. The truth was hidden too long. The manager tried to recover, stammering. It does not matter. You cannot just walk in here and take over. You are not—" His voice collapsed under the weight of his own denial. She stepped forward, placing her hand over the document. Her voice carried the calm of inevitability. "I do not need to take over. I already lead. What you witnessed today was not a performance. It was exposure. You humiliated yourself, not me. Gasps circled the table. A senior board member, pale and shaken, whispered, "We called her a fraud. We nearly assaulted her, and she owns everything we stand in." The system chimed again, the screen flashing immediate audit results complete. Manager flagged for misconduct, bias violations, and breach of protocol. The words appeared bold and undeniable. Executives leaned back in their chairs, some covering their faces, others staring at the manager with disgust. He stumbled backward, sweat beading his forehead. No, no, this cannot be happening. She cannot do this. His tone was hollow, stripped of confidence. She turned toward the guards. "Release them from his command," she said evenly. "He no longer has authority here." The guards exchanged glances. Then, with slow certainty, they nodded. One removed the manager's access badge clipped to his belt. The red light on it flickered, then went dead. A wave of murmurs broke through the room. The intern whispered, "She just cut him off." Another added, "He is done. Right here. Right now." And the manager's face drained of color. He looked smaller than he ever had, shrinking in a space he once dominated. She lifted her gaze to the entire boardroom, her words sharp, unshakable. "You thought my silence was weakness. It was not. It was patience, and patience has an end." The room remained frozen, every person caught between awe and fear. The collapse of his authority was complete, but the reckoning had only just begun. The boardroom was no longer his kingdom. The manager's badge lay useless in the guard's hand, its red light extinguished, a symbol of authority stripped bare. He stumbled backward into his chair, eyes darting around as if someone might still defend him, but no one moved. The silence was heavy, unbroken, except for the soft hum of the system on the wall displaying his misconduct in cold, undeniable letters. She stepped forward, her movements measured, her voice steady. "Effective immediately, you are removed from this company. Your access is terminated, your privileges revoked, your authority dissolved." The intern captured every word, his lens steady now. The analyst leaned forward, her voice carrying across the room. "It is done. He has no power here anymore." The manager's lips trembled, his face a mask of disbelief. "You cannot fire me. I built this board. I carried this company." His voice cracked, reaching for an identity that no longer belonged to him. She did not blink. "You built nothing but a culture of arrogance. You carried nothing but your prejudice. Today that ends." Gasps filled the air. Some executives leaned back, pressing fingers against temples. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing that silence had made them complicit. A woman near the door finally spoke, her voice sharp. "She is right. We stood by while you humiliated her. We let it happen." The system chimed again. "Termination complete. Credentials disabled. Legal audit initiated." The words shone across the screen like a sentence handed down in real time. The manager lunged toward the table, snatching at the document with shaking hands. But one of the guards stepped in, firm and unyielding. "You need to leave," he said. His tone was not hostile, only final. "No!" the manager shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "This is my room, my company. You cannot erase me." She met his outburst with silence at first, letting the weight of his desperation settle. Then she spoke, her voice calm, almost quiet, but carrying across the boardroom like a verdict. "You erased yourself the moment you poured that coffee." The words struck harder than any gavel. The room shifted. Executives who had been uncertain now nodded, some even clapped softly. The intern whispered, "That is the line. That is the moment." The guard moved closer, extending a hand toward the door. The manager, pale and shaking, looked around one last time for support. None came. His kingdom had crumbled in less than an hour. She stood at the head of the table, unflinching, unshaken, the very embodiment of the power he had tried to deny her. The reckoning was complete, but the lesson was not yet spoken. The guards escorted him toward the door, his protests dissolving into fragments that no one cared to hear. "You will regret this. You will all regret this," he muttered, but the words fell flat against the thick silence. When the doors closed behind him, it was as if the entire room exhaled for the first time. The sound of his absence was louder than his shouting had ever been. She remained standing at the head of the table, her blouse still marked with coffee stains, her briefcase closed but firm at her side. The executives stared, some ashamed, some humbled, none unchanged. The intern lowered his phone at last, his recording finished, but his eyes still wide. The analyst sat straighter, her voice clear and steady. We witnessed injustice. We stayed silent too long. But silence does not protect. Silence is complicity. Her gaze swept the room, sharp as a blade, yet calm as a still ocean. I did not need a camera to prove who I am. I did not need to shout to demand respect. I am the record. I am the result. The weight of her words settled into every corner of the room. No one dared to look away. For the first time, respect filled the air where arrogance once lived. She picked up her briefcase and walked slowly around the table, her steps measured, her voice steady. From this day forward, there will be no tolerance for humiliation disguised as authority. There will be no tolerance for bias dressed as professionalism. What happened here is no longer hidden. It is written into the very history of this company. A senior board member finally spoke, his voice low but certain. You have our respect, and you have our leadership. We will follow. She paused, her hand resting on the back of a chair. Do not follow me, she said softly. Follow justice. Follow dignity. That is the only way forward. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then steady, rising like a tide. The intern's hands shook as he clapped, tears shining in his eyes. The analyst pressed her palms together, relief and pride mingling in her face. Even the guards, still standing near the door, bowed their heads in respect. She turned once more toward the table, her final words carrying the weight of every insult overturned, every silence broken. You thought humiliation would define me. You were wrong. I am not the victim of this story. I am the ending of it. The room stood in silence, then in respect. And for everyone present, it was clear. Justice had not shouted. Justice had stood tall, spoken calm, and rewritten the room forever.